They made bricks until their hands bled. They carried mud under scorching sun that cracked their skin. And when they couldn't meet the impossible quota, they were beaten until they passed out. All of this to build cities that would store the wealth of an empire that despised them. But the truth about what the Bible says regarding constructions in Egypt will destroy the most famous myth in history. This is the real story of Exodus chapter 1. The image is engraved in popular culture. Charlton Heston looking at monumental pyramids, thousands of Hebrew slaves dragging gigantic blocks under Egyptian whip. Hollywood sold that version for decades. Documentaries repeated the narrative, and most of the Christian world accepted without questioning. But when you open the Bible and read carefully, you discover something disturbing. The word pyramid doesn't appear, not once. In the entire Old Testament, 0 references to the most iconic structures of ancient Egypt. How is it possible that the most detailed book about the Hebrew permanence in Egypt completely ignores the most impressive constructions in human history? The answer lies in chronology, and it destroys the myth completely. The Great Pyramids of Giza were built approximately between 2550 before Christ and 2490 before Christ. The Pyramid of Khufu took 20 years to be erected during the reign of Khufu. That of Khafra came after. That of Menkaure completed the complex. These dates are confirmed by archaeology, hieroglyphic records, and carbon dating of organic materials found in the structures. Now put that in biblical perspective. Joseph was sold as a slave to Egypt, approximately in 1898 before Christ. The descent of Jacob and the 70 family members happened around 1876 before Christ. And the Exodus, when Moses took the people out of slavery, occurred about 1446 before Christ. Do the math. Between the construction of the pyramids and the arrival of Jacob's family to Egypt, there's a difference of 700 years. 700 years is more time than separates you from the invention of Gutenberg's printing press. The pyramids were already ancient monuments when the Hebrews arrived in Egypt. Egyptian tourists of Joseph's time probably visited Giza to see the wonders built by their ancestors. So what does the Bible actually record about Hebrew forced labor? Exodus chapter 1, verses 11 to 14 is brutally specific. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Supply cities, not pyramids, not monumental tombs, not colossal temples, warehouses for grain, functional structures, utilitarian, built with mud bricks. But the most brutal part of the story remains to be revealed. The text continues describing the construction method. Exodus chapter 5 records the conflict between Moses and Pharaoh over brick production. Verse 7, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick. As before, let them go and gather straw for themselves." Mud bricks mixed with straw, that was the technology. Nothing of limestone blocks of 2.5 tons cut with millimetric precision. Nothing of pink granite transported from Aswan. Mud, water, straw, sun, and hands that never stopped. The straw served as a binder. It prevented the mud from cracking during drying. Without straw, the bricks were weak, broke easily. But Pharaoh didn't care about quality. He cared about humiliation, about breaking the spirit of a people who were beginning to organize. Now gauge the challenge this represented. The production of bricks without straw wasn't just technically inferior, it was physically impossible to sustain. Without the element that gave the mixture cohesion, each brick needed to be made with wetter mud, heavier, more difficult to handle. And the drying time increased. A worker who before produced 100 bricks per day now could barely make 40, but the quota remained the same. 100 bricks every day, without exception. What happened when they didn't comply? Exodus chapter 5 verse 14. And the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before?" Beatings, public, systematic, until bleeding. And then they discovered something that changed everything. Archaeological excavations in the Nile Delta, specifically at Tel el Retaba and Tel el Maskuta, revealed physical evidence of the cities mentioned in Exodus. Pithom was identified with reasonable certainty. Mud brick walls are still there, enormous storage chambers. Some analyses of the bricks found show interesting variation. Lower, older layers contain abundant straw mixed uniformly with the mud. Upper layers, built later, show absence of straw or irregular presence. Exactly as the biblical text describes, the transition from bricks with straw to bricks without straw is preserved in the walls. You can touch the physical evidence of the oppression described in Exodus chapter 5. But the technical challenge went far beyond brick manufacturing. The supply cities weren't small projects. Ramses, named in honor of Rameses II, was one of the largest constructions of the Egyptian New Kingdom. It served as capital during his reign. Research estimates that the city had a built area of approximately 10 square kilometers. 10 square kilometers of mud structures, palaces, temples, warehouses, military barracks, workshops. Everything erected with primitive technology, and everything built by Hebrew slave labor. How do you coordinate tens of thousands of workers without modern communication system? How do you maintain the pace of construction when the basic material was deliberately sabotaged? The answer lay in the brutality of the system. Exodus chapter 1 verse 13. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. Rigor. The Hebrew word is perek. It means cruelty, tyranny, breaking through cruel work. It wasn't just hard work, it was work designed to destroy, to break will, to eliminate hope. And it worked for generations. The scale of the Ramses project demanded industrial brick production. Researchers estimate that structures of that magnitude consumed millions of bricks. Millions. If each worker produced 100 bricks per day and you had 10,000 workers, that's 1 million bricks every 10 days. Seems sufficient, but mud bricks lose volume during drying. They crack, they break during transport. The loss rate could reach 30%. So each million bricks produced resulted in 700,000 usable ones. And when they removed the straw, the loss rate exploded. 40, 50, even 60% of unusable bricks. The math became impossible, but the architecture of supply cities presented an additional challenge. Storing grains in the hot and humid climate of the Nile Delta requires constant ventilation. Humidity creates mold. Mold destroys crops. So Egyptian engineers developed a system of chambers with thick walls and strategic openings for air circulation. The walls had an average thickness of 1.5 meters, 1.5 meters of stacked mud bricks. Each layer needed to dry completely before the next was added. Otherwise, the weight would crush the still wet lower bricks. In dry climate, a mud brick takes 3 to 5 days to dry completely. In the humid Nile Delta, it easily doubles, 7 to 10 days per layer. A wall 4 meters high required approximately 20 layers of bricks. 20 layers times 8 days average drying time. 160 days to erect a single wall to functional height. Now multiply that by the dozens of storage structures that made up the cities. And remember that the workers had no choice of pace. They couldn't stop when tired. They didn't rest when sick. The system depended on constant replacement. When one worker collapsed, another took his place. When he died, he was replaced. Construction never stopped. But the numbers don't tell the true price. The technical data don't reveal the human cost. And that's where the story becomes truly brutal. Exodus chapter 1 verse 22 records Pharaoh's genocidal order. Every son who is born you shall cast into the river. Planned genocide, systematic, directed specifically at Hebrew boys. Why? Because Pharaoh was afraid. Verse 10, "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us." Fear of rebellion, fear of losing. Workforce through insurrection. So the solution was to eliminate the next generation of men, keep the women for work and controlled procreation, exterminate the babies who would become warriors. Skeletal evidence found in worker cemeteries in ancient Egypt reveals consistent patterns of occupational trauma, compressed vertebrae, early arthritis in load-bearing joints like knees and hips, poorly healed fractures in arms and legs, severe wear on teeth from coarse diet and chewing bread contaminated with sand. A published study analyzing skeletons of workers from the New Kingdom period showed that 87% of male individuals had signs of extreme physical work. 87%! And the average age of death was 29 years. 29! Free Egyptian workers from the same period lived on average until 42 years, 13 years difference, 13 years stolen by forced labor. But there's a specific skeleton that tells a more complete story. Identified as individual 327 in an excavation in an area near what was Ramses, this man died at approximately 25 years old. Bone analysis revealed severe compression of the lumbar vertebrae. Fifth and sixth vertebrae fused into a solid block, a condition that causes chronic debilitating pain, limited movement, constant muscle spasms. His hands showed abnormal development of metacarpal bones, bones thicker, denser than normal, consistent with holding heavy tools repeatedly for years. The finger phalanges had healed microfractures, broken fingers that continued working. His knees presented advanced degenerative arthritis, a condition normally seen in men of 60 years or more. He was 25. His burial was simple, shallow grave, no funerary goods, no protective amulets, no resurrection texts painted on a coffin, because he had no coffin, just a body wrapped in a reed mat and deposited in sand. The position of the body suggests it was buried quickly, without elaborate ceremony, without prolonged mourning. Another dead worker, another number. Replace and continue. Work doesn't stop. That was the system. That was the price. How do you convince someone to accept life like this? How do you keep an entire population submissive through generations? The answer is partially in Exodus chapter 1 verse 11, to afflict them with their burdens. But it goes deeper. The Egyptian system of social control was sophisticated. First, geographic separation. The Hebrews lived in Goshen, a semi-isolated region in the delta, limited contact with free Egyptians. This created segregation that facilitated control. Second, hierarchy of oppression. Exodus mentions officers of the children of Israel set over the people by Egyptian taskmasters. Hebrews supervising Hebrews, divide to conquer, creating a layer of collaborators who marginally benefited from the system, kept part of the population invested in maintaining the status quo. Third, and most brutal, was normalization. Generations were born into slavery. They knew only that. Grandparents told stories of Joseph, of how he saved Egypt, of how the family was well received. But those stories seemed like ancient legends, irrelevant to the reality of making bricks under the whip. Exodus chapter 1 verse 8 marks the transition. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. New king, new policy, gratitude forgotten, contribution erased, and thus an entire generation grew up knowing nothing but oppression. But then comes the revelation that changes everything. The one that forces you to rethink the last minutes of this narrative. The supply cities that the Hebrews built had a fundamental design flaw, and it wasn't an accident. The archaeologists who excavated Tel el Retaba and other ruins noticed something strange. The storage chambers had inadequate ventilation for long-term grain preservation. Walls too thick in some places, too thin in others. Shallow foundations that would allow subsidence in the marshy delta soil. In modern engineering terms, these structures were doomed to severe maintenance problems within decades. Why? Two possibilities. First, forced labor produces inferior quality. Workers without incentive do only the minimum. Passive sabotage through deliberate incompetence. Second possibility, more intriguing. The Egyptian engineers knew about the defects and didn't care. Think about it. If the real objective wasn't to build long-term functional warehouses, but rather to keep the slave population busy and broken, then the quality of construction was irrelevant. The process was the product, keeping Hebrews exhausted, making bricks generation after generation mattered more than the durability of the structures. The warehouses were theater, stage for oppression, and this conclusion is devastating. It means that all that suffering, all those compressed vertebrae, all those babies drowned in the Nile, served only to feed a control machine that never intended to produce anything of lasting value. They built to build, they suffered to suffer. The system fed on itself, but there were silent observers. Two Hebrew midwives mentioned by name in Exodus chapter 1, Shiphrah and Puah, verse 15. Pharaoh ordered them to kill all Hebrew boys during childbirth. Verse 17. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. Civil disobedience, silent resistance, and God rewarded them. Verse 21. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. Provided households, gave them families, descendants, legacy. While Pharaoh built monuments of mud that would crumble, these women built lineages that would cross millennia. One of these saved children was Moses. Exodus chapter 2 records how his mother hid the baby for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she placed him in an ark of reeds covered with pitch and left it at the banks of the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter found the child, adopted him, raised him in the palace. Acts chapter 7 verse 22 summarizes, "And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds." He learned architecture, mathematics, engineering, administration, everything the Egyptian empire had to teach, and then used that knowledge against Egypt itself. The irony is brutal. The system that oppressed Hebrews trained the man who would free them. But before the liberation, Moses had to identify with the people's suffering. Exodus chapter 2 verse 11. Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. Looked at their burdens. He saw, really saw, not as a distant observer, as someone who recognized connection. Verse 11 continues, "And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and Moses killed the Egyptian. Consequence, he fled to the desert, spent 40 years as a shepherd, 40 years away from the palaces, away from monumental constructions, away from power, learning dependence, learning humility, learning to hear the voice that would come from the burning bush." Numbers chapter 12 verse 3 makes a surprising statement. "Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who are on the face of the earth." Humble. The man who would confront the leader of the most powerful empire in the known world was humble, not weak. Humble, strength under control. And when God sent him back to Egypt, Moses didn't go to build better structures. He didn't go to reform the system. He went to destroy the system completely. The 10 plagues weren't just demonstrations of power. They were systematic deconstruction of Egyptian worldview. Each plague struck a specific deity of the Egyptian pantheon. The Nile turned to blood-humiliated Hapi, god of the river. The frogs mocked Heket, goddess of fertility. The darkness of 3 days challenged Ra, the supreme sun god. And the death of the firstborn broke Pharaoh personally, for he was considered the incarnate son of Ra. Then we arrive at the final moment. Exodus chapter 12. The night of Passover, lamb's blood on the doorposts. Unleavened bread because there was no time to wait for the dough to rise. And the command, "But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, namely, of her who dwells near her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing." Exodus chapter 12, verses 35 and 36 records what happened. Now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians, plundered, looted, received delayed payment for 430 years of forced labor. The riches stored in the cities they built left, carried on the backs of the builders. Think about the inversion. They built Pithom, they built Ramses, warehouses to store Pharaoh's treasures. And on the night of the Exodus, they emptied the warehouses. They took gold, they took silver, they took clothing. Exodus chapter 38 later records how they used that gold and silver. Verse 24. All the gold that was used in all the work of the holy place, that is, the gold of the offering, was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. 29 talents equal approximately 875 kilograms of gold. 875 kilograms, plundered from Egypt, transformed into the tabernacle, structure that would accompany the people in the desert, place of God's presence. The Hebrews didn't build pyramids, they built cities of mud that would crumble. But with the gold and silver from those cities, they built an eternal sanctuary, not of stone, of obedience. The pyramids impress tourists to this day, monuments to the human attempt to conquer death. But the tabernacle revealed something different, God dwelling with mortals, not in a sealed tomb, in a tent that moved, that accompanied, that descended to be present. The pyramids were about preserving corpses. The tabernacle was about life in the presence of the eternal. And now comes the ending that closes everything. They built supply cities to store Egyptian wealth, Pithom and Ramses, structures that should last forever. And when Moses returned from the desert with a rod, that entire system collapsed in 10 plagues. The cities remained, the warehouses stayed full, but those who left carrying the wealth were the slaves. Exodus chapter 12 verses 35 and 36 records, they asked the Egyptians for objects of silver, gold, and clothing. And God made the people find favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. They plundered Egypt. The pyramids are still there, monuments to eternity. Tourists visit, photograph, admire the precision, the grandeur, the attempt to defeat time through stone. But those who received the eternal inheritance were those who made bricks barefoot under the whip, who had vertebrae crushed carrying mud, who saw children drowned in the Nile. Those inherited promises that no pyramid could contain, land flowing with milk and honey, covenant that crosses generations, name written in a book that doesn't disintegrate. They built for Pharaoh, they inherited promises from God.